Hello, and welcome to this talk on Carl Rogers' person-centered theory of personality. So for this talk, I'm going to utilize this chapter, which is titled A Theory of Therapy, Personality, and Interpersonal Relationships as Developed in the Client-Centered Framework, written by Carl Rogers. And it's a chapter in this book, Psychology, A Study of a Science, Volume 3, published in 1959. So in the introduction of this chapter, Rogers says here that for some time he'd recognised the need for a more up-to-date statement of his theories of client-centered therapy. And then he received a formal request from the American Psychological Association to do just that, to prepare a systematic statement of his theory. And so this chapter was the result, a very helpful resource for anyone interested in client-centered or person-centered therapy. So today we're just going to look at his theory of personality. The chapter itself covers an introduction, and then he looks at defining his terms, has a list of definitions. Then he digs into his theory of psychotherapy and personality change, out of which is developed this theory of personality. This is what we're going to look at today. He then looks at a theory of what he means by a fully functioning person, so we'll also look at that. But he goes on to look at his theory of interpersonal relationships, and then how all these theories apply to life outside of psychotherapy, so family life, education, leadership, group conflict. And then he finishes by looking at all the research. So recommend it, good read. Before we dig in to his theory of personality then, I'll just show you how he covers 40 different terms here, which he defines in detail. This is a brilliant resource if you're interested in person-centered therapy. I'm not going to go through all of these with you today, but I will try to explain them as best as I can to the best of my understanding if we come up against any of these terms as we go through this. But yeah, if you want a resource for understanding these person-centered terms, conditions of worth, locus of evaluation, empathy, internal frame of reference, unconditional positive regard, congruence, openness to experience, defenses. Yeah, this is a great resource for that. This diagram nicely lays out the contents of this chapter. So in the center here is Rogers' theory of psychotherapy. If all these conditions exist, and then if this process happens, then you get these outcomes. And then on the outside here, we have adjoining theories. So out of his theory of psychotherapy comes his theory of personality, and then his theory of a fully functioning person here, theory of interpersonal relationships, and then implications for life and experiences and activities outside of psychotherapy. Let's dig in then to Rogers' theory of personality. So firstly, he postulates characteristics of the human infant. So I'll read some of these out and then explore them. So the individual during the period of infancy has at least these attributes. He perceives his experience as reality. His experience is his reality. He has greater potential awareness of what reality is for him than does anyone else, since no one else can completely assume his internal frame of reference. So I'll just expand on that. So we're subjective creatures, right? There's something what it is like to be me in this moment. And no one else has direct experience of what that's like. Equally, I cannot have direct experience of what it's like to be someone else. We can try, we can get closer, we can be empathic, we can listen to someone explaining their experience, and we can use our experience to try to put ourselves in someone else's shoes, but we cannot get there 100%. I have no USB port you can plug yourself into to experience what it's like to be me. So that's what this means. Our experience is our reality, and no one else can have direct awareness of that. He interacts with his reality in terms of his basic actualizing tendency. Thus, his behavior is the goal-directed attempt of the organism to satisfy the experienced needs for actualization in the reality as perceived. So, our primary motive is of actualizing. What does this mean? Well, think of an acorn. It has a potential to grow into an oak tree, and its motive, if you like, is to do just that. If the conditions are right, this acorn will grow into an oak tree. It will develop. And we too are organisms, and we grow and develop. Now, we also have behavior because we're locomotive. We can move and think and do things, whereas a tree finds that more tricky. So our behavior is our attempts to satisfy our needs for actualization. So in this vein, he behaves as an organized whole, as a gestalt. So it's our entire organism. We'll talk about inner conflicts as we look at this theory, but essentially we are a whole. The organism is a gestalt, one unit. He engages in an organismic valuing process, valuing experience with reference to the actualizing tendency as a criterion. Experiences which are perceived as maintaining or enhancing the organism are valued positively. Those which are perceived as negating such maintenance or enhancement are valued negatively. So this is another way of saying that our experience is valenced. Things feel good or bad to us, okay? So if I'm hungry, that might be uncomfortable. And when I eat, that might feel really good. So this is our organismic valuing process. When needs are being met, it feels good. Or when needs are not being met or are threatened to go unmet, it feels bad and is perceived or valued negatively. So we behave with adience towards positively valued experiences and with avoidance to those negatively valued. So we go towards stuff that feels good, and we go away and avoid things that feel bad. So if we're hungry, we eat. If we need to release our bowels, we go and do that. If we are lonely, we seek company. The human infant is seen as having an inherent motivational system, which he shares in common with all living things, and a regulatory system, the valuing process, which by its feedback keeps the organism on the beam of satisfying his motivational needs. So this is a summary of this first point, that we have an inherent motivational system, which is this actualizing tendency. And we have an inherent regulatory system, the organismic valuing process, which tells us when things feel good or bad, which keeps us on the beam of satisfying our motivational needs, keeps us regulated. When we're tired, we sleep. When we're hungry, we eat. So B, the development of the self. So a portion of the individual's experience becomes differentiated and symbolized in an awareness of being, awareness of functioning. Such awareness may be described as self-experience. This representation in awareness of being and functioning becomes elaborated through interaction with the environment, particularly the environment composed of significant others, into a concept of self. So this is a really important part of the theory, right? I have experience, but I learn to divide my experience into two experience which is me and experience which is not me. Or in this case, experience which is self-experience. So this mug I perceive as not me, whereas this hand I perceive much more as me, or at least a part of me. Or to get more internal, I associate my thoughts, my desires, my motives with me, whereas my perception of other people as not me. This self-experience and awareness of our self-experience, of our being and functioning, grows into a concept of ourself, a self-concept. So as we become aware of this self-experience, we conceptualize it into an idea of me, into a self-concept. Moving on then, C, the need for positive regard. As the awareness of self emerges, the individual develops a need for positive regard. The satisfaction of this need is necessarily based upon inferences regarding the experiential field of another. Okay, so what does this mean? So I differentiate experience, which is me, from not me, and I build that into an idea, a self-concept of who I am. And then I need that self to be positively regarded in the eyes of others. I need to be loved. That's the simple way of putting it. There's parallels with attachment theory here. As an infant, I need to know that others care about me, that they love me, that they're going to look after me. Otherwise, I'm stranded, I'm helpless. But the satisfaction of this need is based upon inferences regarding the experiential field of another. What does that mean? Well, it means that so let's take the need of nutrition, okay? Whether I perceive myself to have consumed certain nutrients or not doesn't really matter. It's whether I have actually consumed those nutrients which meets that need. Whereas with psychological needs, they're met or not met based on our perception. So you might positively regard me, but that only meets my need if I know that and I believe that you hold me in positive regard. If I can't see that, or if I see you as judging me, then the need's not being met, even if you are in fact accepting me and not judging me. So that's what this means. When an individual discriminates himself as satisfying another's need for positive regard, he necessarily experiences satisfaction of his own need for positive regard. So if I help you feel positively regarded, I feel good about me. Or to put it in a much more infantile process, if I see that my smile makes mom feel good and she enjoys that, I feel good about me. So there's a reciprocal nature to positive regard. The positive regard of any social other is communicated to the total regard complex. So I have sort of a unified amount of positive regard within me, and every interaction contributes to that. Consequently, the expression of positive regard by a significant other can become more compelling than the organismic valuing process. So this is really important, right? It's a key part of the theory. So I've got a natural organismic process. I've got a natural organismic valuing process. My body knows what feels good and what doesn't, and what's meeting my needs and what isn't. However, I also have this need for positive regard. Now, what if what actually feels bad to my organism is positively regarded by someone else? Well, now I have an inner conflict, okay? Now I might have to sacrifice my organismic valuing to get positive regard. What's an example of that? Think of a basic example. Maybe I've eaten enough and I am now full. My organism is saying, don't eat anymore. However, my parents want me to finish my plate, and I know that I'll get positive feedback for finishing all my food and negative feedback or punishment if I don't eat all my food. So despite my organism telling me I'm full, I still eat all the food to get the positive regard. Okay, that's a small example of this inner conflict. The development of the need for self-regard. So the positive regard satisfactions or frustrations associated with any particular self-experience or group of self-experiences come to be experienced by the individual independently of positive regard transactions with social others. This is termed self-regard. Okay, so if I run with my example, if I have enough experiences of knowing that I'm going to get punished for not eating all my food, finishing my plate, and getting positively regarded and praised for finishing my plate, then over time, my parents who were giving me that feedback no longer need to be around for me to feel the feedback. I've internalized it. And now, let's say they're not even, now I'm an adult, my parents aren't around, and I feel guilty or ashamed for not finishing all my food. So I still finish it. And I feel good about myself for finishing my plate. So now what was positive regard from others or negative regard from others has become internalized as self-regard. A need for self-regard develops as a learned need developed out of the association of the self-experiences with the satisfaction or frustration of the need for positive regard. Okay. Yeah, so that's what I just explained. The individual thus comes to experience positive regard or loss of positive regard independently of transactions with any social other. He becomes, in a sense, his own significant social other. Self-regard, which is experienced in relation to any particular self-experience or group of self-experience, is communicated to the total self-regard complex. So, like we just looked at, I become to have an internal, almost like a conscience, an internal representation of social others, and so I can feel ashamed with no one else around me. I can internally criticize or praise myself, and I sort of become what used to be the external criticism or praise. So then, the development of conditions of worth. When self-experiences of the individual are discriminated by significant others as being more or less worthy of positive regard, then self-regard becomes similarly selective. When a self-experience is avoided or sought solely because it is less or more worthy of self-regard, the individual is said to have acquired a condition of worth. So a condition of worth then is a condition by which I feel I must stick by if I am to feel worthy. That could be a behavior, a preference, an opinion, a feeling. Maybe, I don't know, common ones might be, or stereotypical gender-based ones might be that boys shouldn't cry or be sad and girls shouldn't be angry. So if I feel like I might cry, I might suppress that because I'm not worthy if I cry. Or I might not accept being angry within myself. I might feel ashamed if I feel angry, for example. These might be examples of conditions of worth. If an individual should experience only unconditional positive regard, then no conditions of worth would develop. Self-regard would be unconditional. The needs for positive regard and self-regard would never be at variance with the organismic evaluation, and the individual would continue to be psychologically adjusted and fully functioning. Although this is hypothetically possible, it does not appear to actually happen. So we all end up with these conditions of worth, basically, but it's possible not to develop them, or at least to think of them as a continuum. So we might have more or fewer conditions of worth sort of pummeled into us as we grow up. Just a note here that He comes to be guided in his behaviour not by the degree to which an experience maintains or enhances the organism, but by the likelihood of receiving maternal love. I thought this was just a nicer, more clearly worded summary of how we sacrifice our organismic valuing process for positive regard. So let's say my parents want me to be a doctor. That's how we've grown up. My father was a doctor, his father was a doctor, and his father before him was a doctor, and it's expected that I'm going to be a doctor. Now, I might have no inclination towards that in my organism, no natural gravity towards healing and becoming a doctor, but it's so embedded within me that that's what I'm going to do and that's what's expected of me, that I might believe I want that so that I am loved, well, or at least well regarded. That would be an example of this condition of worth. So I like this example Rogers gave because it spells out, because this can seem like an impossible conundrum for a parent, okay? So let me go through this example and see how it would be possible to not induce conditions of worth on one's children. This could at least theoretically be achieved if the parental attitude was genuinely of this sort. I can understand how satisfying it feels for you to hit your baby brother, or to defecate when and where you please, or to destroy things. And I love you, and I'm quite willing for you to have those feelings, but I am quite willing for me to have my feelings too. And I feel very distressed when your brother is hurt, or annoyed, or sad at other behaviours, and so I do not let you hit him. Both your feelings and my feelings are important, and each of us can freely have his own. So, obviously, depending on the age of the child, you might not literally word it this way, but if we can genuinely embody this attitude that your inner life is okay, you're allowed to feel angry or upset or hurt, but I'm allowed to feel how I feel about your behaviours and the effects they have, then perhaps we don't then induce or develop these conditions of worth. If I can know that I'm loved for me, and it's not my anger or my preference or my emotion or my thought that is, or fundamentally me that's being rejected, but I can just learn that my behaviours have effects on others, but I'm fundamentally accepted, maybe we don't develop these conditions of worth. Whole interesting parenting topic there. So F, the development of incongruence between self and experience. Because of the need for self-regard, the individual perceives his experience selectively in terms of the conditions of worth. Experiences which are in accord with his conditions of worth are perceived and symbolized accurately. Experiences which are contrary to our conditions of worth are perceived selectively and distortedly, or are in part or in whole denied. So because I need positive self-regard, if something aligns with my conditions of worth, you know, if I run with the doctor example, okay, so I'm allowed to talk about wanting to be a doctor because that fits in with conditions of worth. But if I have an experience of, oh, actually, I really don't want to be a doctor, then I might find all sorts of ways to avoid that thought or feeling, okay? I might distort it, I might explain it away, I might rationalize it, or I might just deny it to awareness. So some experiences now occur in the organism which are not recognized as self-experiences. Thus, from the time of the first selective perception in terms of conditions of worth, the states of incongruence between self and experience exist. So an incongruence then is this disharmony, this discord between my, let's say, true or organismic feelings, preferences, needs versus what I have learnt that I should or ought to or must think, believe, want and feel in order to feel worthy. A bit of explanation here. This is the basic estrangement in man. He has not been true to himself, to his own natural organismic valuing of experience, but for the sake of preserving the positive regard of others has now come to falsify some of the values he experiences and to perceive them only in terms based upon their value to others. Yet this has not been a conscious choice, but a natural and tragic development in infancy. The path of development towards psychological maturity, the path of therapy, is the undoing of this estrangement in man's functioning, the dissolving of conditions of worth, the achievement of a self which is congruent with experience, and the restoration of a unified organismic valuing process as the regulator of behaviour. That sums up the whole theory basically in a paragraph. So we deny our true self for the sake of pleasing others, and then we have an inner conflict and we lose touch with who we actually are. So the path of therapy or growth or psychological maturity is to get back in touch with our true organismic values, preferences, needs, feelings, opinions. So the experience of threat and the process of defense. An experience which is incongruent with the self-structure, as we've just talked about, and thus its incorporated conditions of worth, is subceived as threatening. Subceived, it's like perceived, but more unconscious. So a part of me recognizes the experience, but it's not allowed into my conscious awareness. That's what subceived means. If the experience were accurately symbolized in awareness, the self-concept would no longer be a constant gestalt, the conditions of worth would be violated, and the need for self-regard would be frustrated, and a state of anxiety would exist. So the process of defense is the reaction which prevents this from happening. Let's say I'm not allowed to feel angry if I'm going to live by my conditions of worth. Then, as a part of me notices my anger, maybe even an unconscious part of me notices that, it will find a defense to stop it coming to my awareness, or maybe to rationalize it in some other way. Because if it were allowed in, I would now be split. I would be incongruent, and so a state of anxiety would exist about that. Or let's say I've started medical school and I'm not enjoying it. I might find defenses to not notice I'm not enjoying it, or to come up with other excuses because it's by my conditions of worth. I'm not allowed to not enjoy it. I must continue this process. So defenses consist of selective perception or distortion of experiences, or denial of awareness of experiences. So we can distort what we perceive and what we experience, or we can deny. This ties in really nicely with Freudian defense mechanisms, and in cognitive therapy, the cognitive distortions, black and white thinking, overgeneralizing, rationalizing, mental filtering, all these processes we do, you could fit nicely into this theory that we deny this. We deny our experience to awareness to protect ourselves from feeling anxious and incongruent with ourselves. This keeps the total perception of the experience consistent with our self-structure, consistent with our conditions of worth. But this can lead to a rigidity of perception and an inaccurate perception of reality. So let's move on then to the process of breakdown and disorganization. So if the individual has a large or significant degree of incongruence between self and experience, and if a significant experience demonstrating this incongruence occurs suddenly or with a high degree of obviousness, then the organism's process of defense is unable to operate successfully. As a result, anxiety is experienced as the incongruence is subceived or perceived. The degree of anxiety is dependent upon the extent of the self-structure which is threatened. So let's say it's just no longer deniable. I'm not enjoying medical school. Or to use my other example, I am just angry. And that anger's burst through my defenses and I feel it. I'm now very uncomfortable with this experience because it does not fit my idea of who I am. So disorganization is when our defenses are broken through. So the process of defense has been unsuccessful. The experience is accurately symbolized in awareness. The gestalt of the self-structure is broken by this experience of the incongruence in awareness. A state of disorganization results. In this state of disorganization, the organism behaves at times in ways which are openly consistent with experiences which have hitherto been distorted or denied to awareness, whereas at other times the self may go back to the conditions of worth. So, I might go from I feel anger and it bursts out and I yell at you, and then I flip back into, oh, I'm so sorry, and feeling flooded with guilt. Okay, so I'm now in a disorganized place. Or I flip-flop between, I can't take it anymore, I'm going to quit medical school, and then I feel really guilty about it, and then I find my self-structure comes back in, conditions of worth come back in, and I give it another go. So the process of reintegration. Reintegration is possible. That's a good start. For the process of defense to be reversed, then, for a customarily threatening experience to be accurately symbolized in awareness and assimilated into the self-structure, we must decrease our conditions of worth, increase our unconditional self-regard. We must decrease our conditions of worth and increase our unconditional self-regard. Yeah, that kind of goes without saying, right? In order to reduce our defenses, we need to reduce our conditions of worth, and therefore we need to be more accepting of those things which we have previously denied to our experience or sacrificed for the sake of others' opinions of us, of being liked by other people. The communicated unconditional positive regard of a significant other is one way of achieving these conditions. So if I can meet someone who really accepts me for who I am, I meet someone who they're okay with me being angry. They might not always like yelling or something, but they're fundamentally okay with the fact I have anger. Or I meet someone who likes me whatever job I decide to do, whether that's medical school or not. Maybe then I can decrease my own conditions of worth about these things. In order for the unconditional positive regard to be communicated, though, it must exist in a context of empathic understanding. This makes sense, right? Basically, you can't really be accepted until you're understood. Or at least, what is accepted about you will mean less the less you feel you're understood. And therefore, the more you feel deeply understood by someone, the more their accepting of you will really matter to you and mean something important to you. When the individual perceives such unconditional positive regard, existing conditions of worth are therefore weakened. Increase in his own unconditional positive regard is then attained. And thus threat is reduced, the process of defense is reversed, experiences that are usually threatening are now accurately symbolized and integrated into the self-concept. So our self-concept actually changes. Our sense of who we are changes when we receive this acceptance and believe it. The individual is now less likely to encounter threatening experiences, The process of defense is less frequent and consequences reduced. Self and experience are more congruent. Self-regard's increased. The organismic valuing process becomes increasingly the basis of regulating behavior. The individual becomes nearly fully functioning. So maybe I learn that when I'm full, I don't have to finish my plate. That could be a simple way in which my behavior is now being regulated by my organismic valuing process. Empathic understanding is always necessary if unconditional positive regard is to be fully communicated. If I know little or nothing of you and experience an unconditional positive regard for you, this means little because further knowledge of you may reveal aspects which I cannot so regard. But if I know you thoroughly, knowing and empathically understanding a wide variety of your feelings and behaviours, and still experience an unconditional positive regard, this is very meaningful. It comes close to being fully known and fully accepted. Yeah, so I think we covered that. That if you really understand me and I really let you in, and there I feel you accept me truly, don't judge me, that can change me, can change my idea of who I am, change my self-concept, allow me to be more accepting of myself. Okay, let's quickly then cover the theory of the fully functioning person. So really, this is just a consequence of Rogers' theory of personality. So the fully functioning person will be open to experience because he won't need to be defensive about it, won't need to deny or distort experiences anymore. So all experiences will be available to awareness. All symbolizations will be as accurate as data will permit. So I don't have to deny or distort anything, so I will accurately represent reality as clearly as I'm able to see it. His self-structure will be congruent with his experience. His self-structure will be a fluid gestalt, changing flexibly in the process of assimilation of new experience. He will experience himself as the locus of evaluation. This is really important, right? Because previously, I would be evaluating myself based on how I think others are viewing me. And as I become more self-accepting and more as a fully functioning person, as Rogers puts it, my locus of evaluation will be internal. It'll be inside me, rather than how I care so much about other people and what they think about me. Basically, I'll care less what other people think. The valuing process will be a continuing organismic one. Will have no conditions of worth. He will experience unconditional self-regard. He will meet each situation with behaviour which is unique and creative adaptation to the newness of that moment, because I won't need to deny any experience. He will find his organismic valuing a trustworthy guide to the most satisfying behaviours, because all available data will be available to awareness and used. No data of experience will be distorted or denied to awareness. The outcomes of my behaviour and experience will be available. I won't have to deny the consequences of my actions anymore. Any failure to achieve the maximum possible satisfaction because of lack of data will be corrected by this effective reality testing. I will be more willing to look at reality, more willing to seek the truth, because I won't feel it will threaten me as much. He will live with others in the maximum possible harmony because of the rewarding character of reciprocal positive regard. All the characteristics of such a person are process characteristics. The fully functioning person would be a person in process, a person continually changing. Great. So that is Rogers' person-centered theory of personality. I hope you've found that helpful. Take care.